Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm David Holmes. My guest tonight is Jack Elias. He's a hypnotherapist and NLP practitioner and has studied Buddhism for many years. He's speaking to me from his home in Seattle. Hello Jack, welcome to the programme and thank you for this opportunity of interviewing you.
You're welcome. Thanks for wanting to.
Right. Maybe before we get into some of your current stuff, we'll maybe do a bit of background on you, and if you could tell us something about your early life and as far as religion and spirituality is concerned. How would you describe your early life in those areas?
I was very fortunate to have a very tangible connection to spirit, in part through my mother's love and nurturing, and in part just, I think, with what I brought with me.
Yeah.
And I connected very strongly. I was raised Episcopalian. I connected with the spirit and relationship with Christ, and I also would just set aside things that seemed to me to just be kind of like rigid dogma and not really to the point. So, and I very much recognized that the important thing was to be transformed into an embodiment of the spirit of love, and that there were people who actually had done that, and it wasn't defined or restricted by religion or beliefs. And so I wanted to meet people like that, and I was very fortunate that it was actually quite easy for me to meet people like that.
Yeah.
The first person I met like that was a Zen Buddhist master. As far as I'm concerned, I didn't stop being a Christian because the essence of it was the same. Certainly the forms and the intellectual teachings were different, but the essence, the heart essence, was the same. So I never had a conflict moving from one quote-unquote religious or spiritual orientation to another in terms of the doctrinal outlook.
Right, so you didn't have to leave anything, in a sense. You just added other things to your life as...
Yeah, you could say more like an expansion.
Yeah. So do you feel, looking back, that was a very positive influence on your life and helped you, it still helps you today? That was a grounding, was it, what you would describe it as?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate that I had such early experiences. And also I should mention my Episcopal priest was he was old, but very, very humble man. I remember being deeply impressed one day in church when he was completely vulnerable and open to the whole congregation and talking about how there was this issue. I don't remember what the issue was, but he described how he had prayed about it, and there was just such humility coming from him. It just touched me very deeply and profoundly.
Sounds like a much more enlightened situation than what some people go through.
Yes, that's why I say I'm very, very grateful and fortunate.
That's right. And when was it you first had involvement with Buddhism? I know you had 5 years of Zen practice. What was your earliest recollection of Buddhism?
I was in college. I was in my first year of college, and I found this little book about that big, called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. It was by a translation of little Zen koans, which are like little non-conceptual puzzles.
Right.
And it was translated by Paul Reps. And I opened it up and I read one or two and just had this tremendous upwelling of joy and sense of coming home. And at the same time, a recognition that I had been kind of sad my whole life, because in the background, I recognized I wasn't home. But I didn't know that until this moment of recognition that I was coming home. It was quite an extraordinary experience. I literally started dancing around the room.
Wow.
And so there were hardly any Buddhist books at that time. This was 1966, so there were a couple books by D.T. Suzuki, and I think I read one of those. But my interest was, growing, and by the end of my sophomore year, which was the next year, 67, I had a very big spiritual experience towards the end of the year, and the next day, somebody handed me a brochure about the first Zen Buddhist monastery opening in America that summer, and so 2 weeks later I was there.
Right.
I mean, school ended and I went straight there. But I had no idea of my good fortune because I didn't know anything about the teacher. I just wanted to go and do the practice meditation. But it turned out that Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who's one of the seminal Buddhist teachers who brought Buddhism to America in the 20th century in a practice orientation. There were Buddhist teachers who preceded him, but like D.T. Suzuki, but they mainly were bringing the intellectual explanation. And this, as the brochure said, this was the first actual monastery in America, and I was there for the beginning.
Right. So as you know, there's several traditions within Buddhism. Is there something in particular which attracted you to Zen, or do you embrace most of them?
Yeah, properly understood, the Zen approach is, you could say, it's the essential approach. It's not particularly adorned. It's just going like straight to the heart. The practice, as Suzuki Roshi would teach, would be to sit with no gaining idea, which is very hard for Americans. Like, what's the point? If you're not going to get anything out of it, what's the point? But the point is you sit and you hold the proper posture, which has physiological significance. Hold it without moving, regardless of what you think or feel, and regardless of what sensations or pain that your body might go in from just sitting there cross-legged.
Yeah.
And what happens is, if you practice it with an appropriate understanding and spirit, you recognize slowly that you are not the mind and you are not the body. You don't reject them. There's a growing awareness of an inner intelligent awareness and strength that can observe whatever is happening with the body and mind and not be affected by it in terms of generating fear or suffering.
Right. And also another very strong influence with you was the Siddha Yoga meditation. How would you describe your experience in that area?
So I went to Zen Center 67, and Baba Muktananda, who is the originator of Siddha Yoga. Siddha Yoga is a name he coined to bring the teachings that he was a master of to the West, because he recognized that Westerners needed forms, they needed labels. But his tradition was a tradition of wandering saints, grounded in the Vedas and in Kashmir Shaivism and in Vedanta. But he wasn't part of certainly a lot of flavor of Hinduism, but also Sufism and Islam. The orientation of his lineage is that they welcome, the key is actual enlightenment. There are enlightened beings in any tradition and outside of any tradition, and that the key, that any enlightened being is revered and their teachings are revered, regardless of whether they're in one religion or another. And so Siddha Yoga is very unique in that regard, is that if you read Muktananda's writings or the writings of his successor, Swami Chidvilasananda, who's known as Guru Mai, they're constantly quoting Sufis, Buddhists, Christians, whatever, anywhere where you find actual awakened consciousness, it's recognized and revered. So he came to the U.S. for the first time in 1970 on his first world tour, and a friend told me about him coming. I didn't know anything about him. My friend said, there's this spiritual master coming to town. Why don't we go see him? And I said, okay. So we went, and I was sitting way in the back of this auditorium, but nevertheless, I had a very powerful connection with him that was energetic, tangible, from the heart. And I was in a great state of calm and peace and openness, but I didn't feel like I needed to leave Suzuki Roshi. I just was happy there was another true teacher in the world.
Right.
But what was to happen was that I didn't know anything about what Baba Muktananda was doing. I didn't know he was on a world tour, but he did periodically world tours. And by my good fortune, every time he did one, I kind of bumped into him. And but I actually didn't get involved in the practice of Siddha Yoga until after Suzuki Roshi died in 1971, and then when he died, I started studying with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, a Tibetan teacher, and I studied with him for 16 years until he passed away. And it wasn't until after that that I, again, just bumped into Guru Mai, and I was ready then to completely get involved in Siddha Yoga because my Buddhist teachers had passed away, and I didn't feel a particular connection to their designated successors.
Right. So would you say that Siddha Yoga is a lifetime of study and practice? It doesn't come to an end. You always grow, or you're always learning more.
I would say that about all of them.
Yeah.
I would say that about all of them. But the emphasis is on it's on transformation. It's not on intellectual ideas or beliefs. It's about being transformed by consciousness itself, which is activated on the student's behalf by the enlightened master. So the guru-disciple relationship is crucial in Siddha Yoga, and it's also crucial in Buddhism.
Right.
It's also crucial in Christianity, but most Christians don't know that.
Right.
In my experience.
Just briefly, Jack, we've lost a little bit of light on your face. Just a little bit. That's okay. That's a lot better. And if you could maybe tilt the camera a little bit.
Okay.
Just a little bit. Maybe it might be a little bit. Let's have a look. That's fine. And maybe slightly the other way. Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
That's ideal. Thank you. Let's continue. So this brings me to NLP and another major thing in your life. How would you describe your first contact? When did you first become aware of NLP?
I think my first encounter with NLP was a book called Frogs into Princes by Steve and Connie Ray Andreas. And again, I've been so fortunate. These things just fall into my lap. When I left Zen Center, which was in San Francisco when Suzuki Roshi died, and I studied with Trungpa Rinpoche. His main center was in Boulder, Colorado, so I moved to Boulder, Colorado. Well, it turned out that the authors of this book lived in Boulder, Colorado. And they had one of the major training centers for NLP. There were very few at that time. This was at the beginning of NLP. This was 1980. So there they were. So I did my NLP training with them in 1980. Roughly, might have been 81, I'm not sure. But for me, NLP was little bits and pieces of Buddha Dharma. So when I took the course, it was very familiar to me because I had a very tangible sense that what was being presented is what I had been studying, but in a much more comprehensive way. And I was kind of shocked. I was probably the only one in the class of about 50 people who wasn't a psychologist or psychotherapist, and they were all being blown away by what was being presented. And I was shocked because I was thinking, if they didn't teach you this in college when you were getting a degree in psychology, what were they teaching you?
Yeah.
So that reinforced my notion that I didn't need to go back to college to get a degree in psychology. That I had picked the right way to learn about psychology.
Okay. So from the point of view of a person who is really new to NLP, how would you explain the basics and what it is and what it's about?
NLP is, in terms of the view, and basic understandings of NLP. It's drawn from classic Western wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
The people who formed NLP were very well educated. One was a PhD linguist. The other one was had an MA in something or other, but he was also one of the early computer people, and plus he was a musician, and they hung out with some of the most skilled therapists of the time, Virginia Satir, Fritz Perls, Milton Erickson, and what they did most successfully was codify what these skilled therapists were doing. Because if you ask these skilled therapists, how did you do that? They would just say, I'll just follow my intuition. So what was excellent about these guys, they were excellent at observing and being able to recognize and codify and break it down into a step-by-step technique so that other people could learn to do what these master therapists were doing.
Right.
But in terms of the view, in terms of the essential wisdom, it's nothing new. It's right. It's always there in Western tradition. And it's just that most people have a very poor education, and it's been getting worse and worse. So people think it's all brand new, but it's really just ancient understandings that have been passed along. And so besides doing being able to describe step by step how to closely reproduce results, they also were great marketers.
Yeah.
And that's why NLP spread like wildfire. Because they knew how to hook people.
Yeah.
They knew how to get them interested. And, by and large, what they were offering was valuable. But, everything has a, kind of a double-edged sword. Because when you get these understandings about the human psyche and what makes people tick, if your heart is in the wrong place, you can just become a master manipulator. And a lot of people took advantage of these NLP teachings to cultivate their desire to manipulate people for their own ends.
Yeah.
So that's not so good. But if your heart's in the right place and you want to help people, then learning how people tick and learning what it takes for people to be able to change, then it's very valuable. You can benefit lots of people.
Right. So do the teachings of NLP, do they grow? I know obviously there's a growing interest in NLP, and how is it developing, do you feel? Is it from, say, the early days?
It's developing in terms of elaboration of techniques. The technology hasn't changed particularly, but you can have millions and millions of techniques, and then that also still gets mixed up in the marketing thing that can have its problems, because people proclaim brand new techniques all the time, and they give them these fancy names, but really it's the same old technique,
right,
just by a different name.
Okay.
With a few bells and whistles attached to it.
Right. Another basic question is about hypnotherapy and hypnosis, and I know you're a hypnotherapist.
Yeah.
How do you explain to, say, a relative novice the advantage of hypnotherapy over hypnosis?
Well, one simple way to do that would be to let's define hypnosis as purely giving suggestions, like telling you to stop smoking and start doing healthy exercise. Just giving you that suggestion in a very effective way, hypnotically, so that it goes in. And so you start responding in that way. But what happens is, like, a month later, 3 months later, 6 months later, it might go away. And you might go back to your old habits.
Yeah.
And that's because just giving suggestions would be like ripping the top off of a dandelion. It goes away for a while, but the root is still alive, and the root's going to reproduce the symptom. The root's going to reproduce the flower. So that's the shortcoming of just hypnotic suggestion without the therapy part, which is, the therapy part is using the power of accessing the subconscious mind with hypnotic suggestion and uprooting the cause. When you get rid of the root of a symptom, then it's not going to come back. In the same way, if you dig up the root of a dandelion, it's not going to come back.
Yeah.
So that's probably the most important distinction between hypnosis and hypnotherapy.
Right. And another thing that I read was part of your situation is that part of the problem is people's perception. And as you say, it's just a perception, but if they buy into that to a great extent, that really causes a lot of problems. Is that a pattern in the work that you do, is to try and dissuade them from certain situations, or to believe?
Well, let me create a greater context for your question, and that is, as I said before, NLP was little bits and pieces of the teachings. The same is true for the hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Hypnosis, hypnotherapy, NLP, they're fundamentally the same thing. They have just different rituals, but they're based on the same understanding of communicating with the subconscious mind. So the teachings from the East, and I'll just pick the Siddha Yoga teachings, but they're also in the Buddhist teachings. But in Siddha Yoga, they talk about the 5 powers of God, the 5 powers of infinite consciousness. And 3 of those are very familiar to us, and that's creation, sustaining, and destruction. Everywhere you look, all of phenomenal reality, it comes into being, that's creation. It hangs out for a while, that's sustenance, and then it disappears, it dies, that's destruction. So, but that's all very familiar to us. The other 2 are interesting in terms of our human suffering, our mental and emotional suffering, is that the 4th one is the deluding creating power. The power that makes us forget that we are God, that we are this very infinite being. We're not separate, fragile, flawed beings. And that deluding power is the power of language.
Yeah.
It's called matrika, is the Sanskrit word. So language is the deluding power. So in other words, language is hypnosis. It's the deluding power. Language is the conceptual formulation. You're small, you're separate, you're flawed, be afraid. Okay?
Yeah.
So with that context, then you can understand that people are in hypnosis all the time. Who you think you are is simply a hypnotic state.
Yeah.
And so it's very important to use language, which is the poison, in the same way you would use snake poison to create an antidote to snake poison. Skillful use of language antidotes the deluding power of language. So, just as an example, I'm very careful with language. Like you asked me if the problem is in people's perceptions, and I think most people would say, yeah, that's right, because most people don't take the time to be very rigorous with how they use language. So the problem is not in perception. Perception means perceiving, which means taking in raw data through your senses. The data you perceive has no meaning, so it doesn't affect you at all. So your perception is not the problem. What happens is that we very quickly, as we are given birth and get oriented inside of this body-mind, we very quickly develop this natural interpretive function, so that our senses are always bringing in perception.
Yeah.
But we're not affected by the perceptions. We're affected by our interpretation of the perception.
Right.
And our interpretation is our thinking. Yeah. So we create our suffering by the way we think, and the phrase "by the way we think," what that really means is the hypnotic suggestions we give ourselves.
Yeah. So is it
so it's our thinking and our interpretation. It's our self-talk that is what's creating our problem.
Right. So, is it one of your roles to get them to move away maybe from the internal dialogue, or make them more aware of what they're going through? Because obviously, someone comes to you, they need some help. Is there a common approach, or is every client very different to you?
Well,
how
both.
You approach them?
You know, I have a common approach, and everybody's very different.
Right.
The common approach is what I just said, which is that language is inherently hypnotic. So I help people transform their inner dialogue, so that it's supportive and generates a sense of well-being and enthusiasm and encouragement, and also help them recognize that they can just turn it off at will when they want to, because you don't need it all the time. Most people think that if they weren't thinking, they'd be stupid or asleep or like a zombie. And because people are addicted to their thinking mind, there would be a lot of demonstrations that would kind of suggest that. But the fact is, our intelligence and our awareness are not a function of thinking. Our intelligence and our awareness are independent of thinking. But most people don't appreciate that. Most people hang on to their thinking for dear life, because they think they'd be nothing without it. And that's a terrible hypnotic suggestion. So I work very deeply with people at these root hypnotic suggestions that are the underpinning of all their other suffering. So the work I do generally is very powerful, very enjoyable, and goes very quickly for the most part.
Right. So was helping others something you always wanted to do, or was there a certain stage you'd have to obviously complete study and do things like that? I mean, it's your career now, isn't it? You help people. It's a multifaceted approach.
Yeah, I've been in private practice for 26 years, and I've also been training people to be hypnotherapists for 26 years in my unique approach, which is a synthesis of these Eastern understandings with the Western understandings. And it's a very unique approach, simply because nobody else has my background.
Yeah.
And as I said, it's very powerful and delightful. Most people think you have to suffer to change. You don't. Most people think it takes a long time and it's kind of an insult, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's actually it's actually quite fun.
Right. So is part of what you do the training or the working with people so that they will realize a lot of their problems, a lot of solutions are within them, and you're showing them how to do that. I mean, to what extent is what you teach, to what extent is it working with their approach to realize that you can solve a lot yourself, but you're training them or teaching them to do that, or it's an awareness or a growing awareness, is it? Because a lot of problems maybe are caused by someone thinking, or maybe not. A lot of it's subconscious, would you say? And one of the roles is to bring it into the consciousness so they'll be more aware and more able to work. So if something's subconscious, but it must reach a stage where someone has a problem and they come to see you. Is there other patterns in that about what stage people are at before they come to see you? Because they must have a reason within them to look for help.
Well, yeah, it would be when they're experiencing enough pain or frustration that they seek help.
Yeah.
But that could be different for everybody. People have different tolerance. So some people could come with what you might say is a very minor problem relative to the problem that somebody else might come with. But basically everybody's suffering. Everybody's suffering because of their thinking. And it's habitual thinking, and that's what we point at when we use the label subconscious mind. There is no thing called the subconscious mind. That's part of the diluting aspect of language, is that language is full of nouns, and we all learn that nouns are things. But there really are no things. There's just activity.
Okay.
There's functionality. So we use a noun, subconscious mind, or conscious mind for that matter, or ego for that matter. Those things don't exist. They're not things. They're labels for activities, which is why in my book, Finding True Magic, I coined the term egoic minding process. And I give a discussion about this problem with nouns, and that there is no ego. There's an egoic minding process. And the egoic part of it is that the nature of this process is that it turns in on itself. It's self-conscious. It's creating the notion of a separate being, which is just a hypnotic suggestion, and then hallucinating all kinds of problems for that being and trying to solve them. But they're all fantasy problems around a fantasy being, so they can't be solved. So in my work, I help people to recognize that. Like people come and think, I have a problem with myself, and I have to do something about myself. And I, again, in my book, in Finding True Magic, and in my trainings, and in my class, in my therapy, I help them recognize there's nothing wrong with you. Your being is pure and fine, and you're full of virtues. You're full of a capacity and ability to love. The problem is in your thinking.
Yeah.
Your heart, your loving heart, moment by moment, always is making a gesture to open. But from childhood, we've had programming installed that as soon as it's like you're making a gesture to open your hand to somebody, as soon as that happens, the program comes in and swats your hand and says, stop that.
Yeah.
And so you shut down.
Right.
But there's nothing wrong with you. You have the capacity to go like this. The problem is that you give importance and prestige to that message that says shut down.
Right.
Now it's understandable that you did that when you were 3, and there was an actual person there shutting you down with threats or neglect or whatever. But it's important to wake up from that when you're an adult and recognize, I'm an adult. I survived that. I don't have to abide by those rules anymore. I can flourish.
Yeah.
But people suffer to the degree that they don't recognize that, and they keep living as if they're under somebody's thumb.
Yeah.
And they know they're not, for the most part, although some people are still living with their parents, but for the most part, people are not living with their parents, and their parents are dead, but they project that experience of being intimidated or abused or neglected from childhood. They then project that onto God or onto society, like what will other people think of me is very prevalent. Everybody's afraid of what other people will think of me. Really, that's just a projection onto everybody, the nastiness that you experience from 1 or 2 specific people.
Yeah. Actually, my next question was going to be about your book, True Magic. How would you describe that process? Where did it start? The idea that you would write this book. Did it come to you gradually? Or?
Well, people were begging me for years to write it. People who were in my training, and I didn't want to do it. I was lazy. So, I think after about 5 years. Finally, it was my youngest son. He started pestering me, and I said, okay. So I started writing. Once I started writing it, I promised myself I'll write for an hour a day, and that's all I have to do, just an hour a day. But many days I would go over an hour. But the key was to just do it an hour a day. So I wrote every day, and it took about a year to actually write it.
Right. So. It was something you had a basic idea of what you wanted to do, and
because it was like all inside of me, and I was just off the top of my head saying it to people in class, which was why they were pleading, please write this down. This is such great stuff. Write it down so we can have it.
Yeah. So it took a long time from, say, the beginning of the idea to fruition, but
Yeah.
was it a relief when you were finally able to do that because you'd had all this stuff inside you? Was it therapeutic for you?
I wouldn't say it was therapeutic. I had a sense of accomplishment, but I also had a sense for a little while of, well, I don't need to say anything now. It's read the book. But I worked that out. I realized that, well, one thing I realized that when people read, they don't actually absorb very much. I have people tell me all the time, you know, every time I read your book, I find something that wasn't there before.
Right, that's an interesting one.
And that, you know, that's not unique to my book, but because it was my book, and I was getting feedback, because I never got feedback about other people's books, and so I never particularly thought about the fact that we don't really absorb or retain that much, myself included. But when it was my book, I got to get that feedback and go, oh, wow. I shouldn't think that because people have read my book, I have nothing more to say to them. Because they've like maybe retained 1%.
Yeah.
And that you can't have a working knowledge as opposed to an intellectual knowledge. You can't have a working knowledge of what's in my book unless you give it deep study and contemplation and practice. And that takes years. I mean, I've never stopped studying it and working with it. You know, I tell my students, like this year I just completed in July my 26th annual summer intensive, 17-day summer intensive. And I tell my students, I says, I've been taking this course 4 times a year, because I teach it 4 times a year, for 26 years. So you're wondering, well, should I take it once or twice? And, gee, Jack is so good. How can I be as good as Jack? And I said, well, if you want to be as good as me, take this course 100 times.
Yeah, that's an interesting one about, I mean, I've had an experience myself of reading a book more than once, and all of a sudden something clicks. I don't know why that is, because maybe if you're open to it, you're thinking about your first reading. I'm not quite sure why it happens, but it's
well, my opinion is that, again, working with meditation and the nature of our consciousness is that our attention is very fickle.
Yeah.
And not only does it jump around, but we're in very little brief bursts. We're like awake, asleep, awake, asleep, awake, asleep, which means if you're reading a book or listening to a CD or watching a video, your consciousness, you're going awake, asleep, awake, asleep, awake, asleep. And so when you watch it or read it again or you listen to it again, a lot of it seems new to you because the sequencing of your being awake and asleep is different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite enlightening when something pops out that was always there, but you didn't see it. But it depends.
Yeah, you were asleep all those other times.
Yeah, great to finally awake. And continuing on with books, you're a contributing author to the book If I Were Your Daddy, This Is What You'd Learn. How did that come about, that experience?
That came about, I work with clients all over the world by phone and Skype, like what we're doing right now. And I had a client in Chicago. I never met this person, but I worked with them individually. I worked with them with their relationship and family issues, and it was so helpful to them that there came a point where they wanted to write a book about parenting, and they had a great idea, which was to search out people, very high-profile people, who had instructive, heartfelt stories that they would share about their parenting experience. And so she collected, there's a Nobel Prize winner in this book, there's very high profile doctors and teachers and spiritual leaders, all these incredible people, and me. And that's because I'm not a high-profile people, but because I was her counselor, she got to recognize that I had this tremendous value that, frankly, was equal to the value that all these other high-profile people had, because high profile is not so important as the fact that we're just all human beings.
Right.
And so she asked me to be in the book and contribute a story, which I did. So now I'm in this fantastic company in this wonderful book on parenting. That's, even though it says if I were your daddy, this is what you'd learn, mommies would also learn an incredible amount from this book.
It's quite a it's quite an unusual approach, isn't it? And that's it's just collaboration and not just your ideas, but several other people.
Yeah.
Are there any?
35 contributing editors,
right.
or contributing authors.
Right. So are there any plans for any more books, or?
Well, I was also contributing author since we spoke last to a book on Bucky Fuller.
Right.
So again, the man who is a devotee of Bucky Fuller, he did the same format. He found a bunch of people who were students of Bucky, who were affected by Bucky, and he asked them to share a story.
Right.
About how Bucky personally or his teachings affected their life. And he asked me, again, he knew me not because I was so high profile, but because we were studying Buddhism with the same teacher.
Right.
And he came to me again. He came to me for therapeutic help, and so I had the good fortune that he got to experience that I had something of value, and so he asked me to write a chapter for the book.
Right. But for those who aren't familiar with Bucky, how would you describe his work? Maybe.
Buckminster Fuller was a pioneer of consciousness, of heart and science. He developed breakthrough technologies. You know, most people know about the geodesic dome. He coined the term spaceship Earth. He was a great visionary and a great scientist, a wonderful man. Highly recommend that people study his teachings. You know, Google him and just read quotes.
Okay.
Fantastic quotes readily at hand on the internet of Buckminster Fuller.
Buckminster Fuller, right. That's the power of Google. I mean, there's not much
to
find out. I mean, has that technology assisted what you do to bring it out to an audience? I mean, technology is amazing these days, the rate at which it moves. So,
it certainly makes it easier, I think. You know, in the beginning, I was just having a conversation with a young therapist. You know, I'm such an old man now.
Well,
I don't feel like an old man.
Compared to me, maybe you're not.
I don't feel like an old man, but I realize I'm talking to somebody who could be my granddaughter. And they're a full-grown person. But anyway, they were asking me about how I did my work, and I said, in the beginning, I advertised in lots of national magazines in their advertising section. You know, New Age Journal, Yoga Journal, Psychology Today, all those kind of, they've all kind of disappeared because of the internet, and I don't have to do that anymore. So now I have a website, which is findingtruemagic.com. I have a blog, which is blog.findingtruemagic.com, and I have a lot of wonderful, instructive clips, in my humble opinion, on YouTube. People can really get a sense of me and what I have to offer. There's no risk anymore, and you don't know what you're getting.
Right. So, are there any other aspects of your work that we haven't discussed yet? Because
let's see.
Gone through.
Well, I work with individuals privately for personal work. I also do professional work like corporate coaching. I work with families. I work with children. I work with couples.
Nice.
So I have a very broad spectrum of competencies, and in addition to that, private work, which again I do internationally, as well as in person, and my training I also do in person, and I have wonderful distance learning training DVDs and CD packages.
Right, it's encouraging that companies are coming to you. I think
that's
a great development.
Yeah, one quote one CEO kind of shocked me because we just were a little bit into the session, and he said, "Jack, I would have paid you $10,000 for what I just learned from you in 20 minutes." And I thought, "Damn,
you missed one. You missed that one.
I'm not charging anywhere near $10,000 for 20 minutes."
Is that a fairly recent development? Companies are searching you out because there must be some more enlightened people at the head of these companies for that to happen.
Well, I'm still more working with individual corporate leaders as opposed to going into their offices and doing corporate trainings.
Yeah.
Mainly because my focus has been colored or flavored by the fact that I was a single dad for a very long time. So I did not travel. I did not go out a lot. Mainly, I wanted people to come to me because I had I had 4 kids, and for a while I had my oldest daughter, just my oldest daughter, because she was on oxygen 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I was blessed with the fact that I could just work from home.
Yeah.
And when she passed away, my other 3 kids came to live with me. So I still pretty much wanted to be at home. So I haven't done the cultivated, like being a world traveler, going to corporations around the world, which many people do, but I haven't done that.
That's great, because I mean, it didn't used to be the case. Companies, well, employees, shall we say, were stuck with the nature of their employers or the senior people. So I think that's very encouraging to the word's getting through to more people, and the more we can get through to senior people, the more I think maybe it will pass down.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Down that level. And with another thing, I mean, we all, I suppose, we all realize the value of meditation. Is that a very important part of your life, and something that you, if someone isn't doing that, you encourage them to help themselves by adopting that practice? And what do they, is there a pattern, or is it just whatever time you have, or physically make some time to be quiet? Because a lot of people aren't good in their own company. Would you find that to be true? And meditation helps with that.
First, meditation can mean many things to many people. So I would make that clear to people, because a lot of people have all these weird ideas about what meditation is, and they just can get themselves in trouble and then get disenchanted. One of the best ways to understand what meditation is meditation is taking the time to pay attention to your own mind and to familiarize yourself with how your own mind works, and with what cultivating a deeper ability to actually recapture a felt sense of your being a living organism.
Yeah.
Like I had a client just the other day tell me how they're starting to give themselves permission to nurture themselves, and they went to the beach and they found a nude beach, and there was no sexual stuff going on, just being nude in nature. And he shared how he was like laying in the ocean and then on the beach, and he was talking about all these sensations and stuff that he was having, and he was like, wow, what is this? He was like kind of getting a little afraid. What is this? And what am I supposed to think about this? And I just said, look, man, you're a living organism. You were just experiencing being alive.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So I would say that meditation is enhancing your sensitivity to the already fully operating intelligence of being a living organism.
Right.
And the other part of your question is in terms of taking the time to pay attention in that way. Absolutely, it's very good to make it habitual, to have a certain time every day if you can, in a certain same place every day if you can, and for a set amount of time.
Yeah.
And that set amount of time can be very small, and it can let it grow naturally. Like people think, oh, I can't meditate for an hour, I can't sit still for an hour. You don't have to. Start with 2 minutes if you have to.
Yeah.
The key is doing it every day, same time, same place, and then your habit-forming power will take over.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that because it takes me back to 1986 and my very first meditation, because I considered myself a person who doesn't do that stuff because my mind is too active. I can't switch off. I remember us all lying down in a circle towards the centre and thinking, well, I'll see how this goes. But all of a sudden, I was there. I was under. And that was one of the major experiences of my life. And for me to be still for half an hour was absolutely wonderful. I'll never, ever forget that.
It's wonderful.
And,
what people will do with an experience like that is they'll start to long for and revere that stillness, but they'll be thinking of it as something separate from them.
Yeah.
And then they'll go searching for it, as opposed to remembering that what you were experiencing was your own self.
Yeah.
It's not somewhere else. It's not a thing that you've lost. It's your own self. So relax and open again. Relax and open again. It'll always be there. Guaranteed. It's always there.
That's right. And as you said, it doesn't always have to be sitting. For me, listening to a spiritual tape or some personal growth, it gets me in touch with the higher self. I regard that as a meditative practice to train my mind to really get on the right track.
Whatever creates the opening is worthy.
And getting in touch with the higher self, the more we can do that, surely the better our lives are going to be. So maybe we're coming slow towards the end, but is there anything else you'd like to share with us, Jack, about the work that you do and what your advice to people, how to enhance their lives?
Well, I love what I do, so I hope whoever is listening to this will be inspired to check out my blog, my YouTube clips, maybe get my book or some of my individual tapes or tape DVD programs. The point is, I love what I do, and I'd love to work with you, whoever you are.
Right.
And so I hope to hear from some of you.
Right.
And then we can go farther. So
how do you see your career progressing? What do you aim to just keep growing and to be more aware of what's possible?
When I started, I had a very powerful sense of my mission, and my vision of my mission was I was going to do this and serve in this way and share what this incredible gift that has been given to me, because it is a gift, and I feel very grateful. As my intention at that time when I was beginning this work was, I'm going to do this till the day I die.
Wow, that's quite a powerful commitment. And your days must be very full because you have a lot of clients, you have a lot of things, a lot of different aspects of your work, talking to different people. Is that do you make time to relax?
But well, I'm very relaxed when I'm doing it. Okay. It's an act of it's a passion, it's a love. I feel very grateful and very gratified when I work with people because I get to see them opening up. Right. It's very, very gratifying, very humbling.
So there may not be a lot of spare time, but do you deliberately take yourself away from it sometimes to give you more perspective, or in the sense?
Yeah, I take time to just spend with myself and with my family. Sure.
Yeah, you live in the great city of Seattle, which I haven't seen for many years, but I spent some time with friends in Kirkland and Redmond, and I enjoyed those times. So do you work all over the US, or you're based mainly in Seattle and people come to you electronically or through the internet?
Yeah, I'm based in Seattle. Occasionally I'll go other places, but thanks for reminding me, there are some people in London right now who are working to bring me over there. So within the year, I think I'll be coming to London to do probably a 3 to 5 day training of some kind.
Oh, well, I look forward to knowing.
Yeah, so I'll have to keep you in the loop.
Yeah, maybe we'll finally make we'll meet up sometime and see how that goes. But
bring all your friends.
I certainly will.
Okay.
So thank you for speaking to us tonight, Jack. I've enjoyed this way of communicating, I think there's a lot of potential for that in people that want to get their message across. So if you know of anyone else who have an interesting story to tell,
I'll think about that. Yeah, I will.
Because
thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share.
Okay, thank you for your time tonight, Jack.
Okay.
Goodbye for now.
Bye.
Bye for now.